Uh-oh. 5 lies churches tell themselves. We're going to look at those today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, churches don't mean to be liars.
Ooh, it sounds even worse saying that. Liars. Telling a lie sounds a lot gentler than liar.
I think maybe we could call this 5 ways churches deceive themselves. It's like tricking themselves into believing things about themselves that are not true.
That's softer. That's nicer.
Softer, which is more accurate. I don't think that churches are intentionally telling lies, but they are in fact untruths about themselves that they often tell. And I guess I need to give all the caveats here on the front end, AJ, so that I feel better about myself as we go through this episode.
Yeah.
These are not, we got five sort of self-deception things, self lies. Not every church tells these lies to themselves. Not every church tells all 5 of these lies to themselves. Some churches tell some of these lies to themselves some of the time. That would be, have I given enough couching language here?
Hey, our team experiences a lot of repetitive things after working with hundreds of churches and probably thousands of leaders in churches because we deal with teams. So these are some common things, as is, a lot of our episodes. It's our experience with churches. Things start to come up that we see over and over and over again. And here's 5 of them.
5 of them. Yeah. We've seen these things a lot. So behind the curtain for you, if you're wondering, I wonder if I'm telling myself one of these lies. Well, hopefully we can get to the bottom of that today. All right, AJ, let's hop straight into it.
Let's do it. The first one is being told. So again, from the perspective of a consultant and working with a leadership team, this is feedback, statements that are either explicitly stated this way or the theme or idea is expressed. So the first one is that.
Wait, hold on. Wait. One last thing I want to say before we get into this. And I mean this sincerely. Which usually, like, if people say that, then maybe they don't mean it.
Everything up till now has been insincere. Go ahead. Okay.
From the bottom of my heart, I don't have any specific church in mind when we put this list together. I don't want anyone, because we have a lot of folks that I've worked with who listen to this podcast, and I don't want anyone to think they are being put on blast. I've heard this. These are things we've heard from a lot of churches. No specific church in mind in the creation of this.
All right. But if the shoe fits, run a marathon in that sucker. Okay. Number 1, we are known for being friendly. Our church is known for being friendly. I think a slightly other way of that is simply our church is friendly. We're a friendly church. We don't think it would be anything on us if a guest comes and doesn't want to come back because we're very friendly. Or a guest would feel welcome at our church because we're very friendly. So this is super common. And
this is by far and away the number one thing we most frequently hear. We're a very friendly church.
And I've heard that. So we work usually when we go in and we do our strategic envisioning process with the church. Usually it's on a Friday evening. We work quite a bit. And then we're for several hours. And then most of the day on Saturday, we're together with a leadership team of the church. And then normally we stay over on Sunday, go to worship. Sometimes that might involve us speaking or preaching, or sometimes just sitting there in the congregation and kind of experiencing the church as a guest may experience the church. And so we might have already heard from them some kind of phrase about them being a friendly church. And then we show up on Sunday and see, well, okay, what does that look like? I can't wait to see this. Often we could walk in as a quote unquote guest and be greeted not at all, or, perhaps given a bulletin, greeted at the door, go in, find a seat, never talk to another human being, never be approached by anybody else. Um, and, and so, and we obviously are looking for particular cues or things that might happen. But we could certainly experience a church for the first time after being told they're friendly and never witness friendliness by anything that would even remotely appear sincere.
Yeah. And this is a tough one because friendly by nature is sort of a subjective measurement. Like you can't, what's the friendliness meter, And is the suggestion then that these churches that say that they are friendly, does it mean that they are unfriendly? Very rarely not. I mean, very, very often the church seems lively enough and warm and kind and all of those things. So I guess to call it a lie is maybe, I don't think I'm being unfair, actually. It's easy to tell yourself that here's why this is a problem. Let me take a step back. Like, why are we even bringing this up? Because it's easy, like you said, AJ, to tell yourself we're really friendly. Therefore, if guests don't come back, that's on them. That's not on us because we're really friendly. And so I guess I want to just tell you, get out of the friendliness question altogether. It's too hard to measure. How friendly you are is kind of irrelevant. The question is, how effective are you at building a relationship is a better question.
Yeah, great.
Friendly implies that you are making a friend. And if you're looking at the results of of everything you're doing, your greeting and your guest follow-up and all that, and people aren't coming back, that's an indicator that we're not making friends. We might be friendly, but we're not making friends. And that's a more important question. So I guess it's maybe not a lie in the sense that I'm not suggesting that churches that say that they're friendly are actually unfriendly, although there are some instances of that. That's a fringe case. The majority of the time, they're friendly enough. Like they're friendly. It's not a question of how nice you are. It's, are we actually making a friend? Which is a more important question. And the answer to that question is very often no. No, we're not. We're not building a relationship.
Yeah, and usually we're so busy being friendly with people we're already friends with is why we're not being friendly to people we're not yet friends with. So because the church that thinks they're so friendly, they are to the people that they're friends with. Because we can experience that as a guest. I could sit down in that pew or that chair and look around and witness friendliness taking place. People know each other. They love each other. They're happy to see one another. There's handshakes and hugs and laughter. It's not happening with me. I'm not participating in it. I haven't been invited into that, but it's happening all around me.
And listen, not everyone, I don't want to get overwhelmed by a bunch of handshakes and hugs from strangers anyway. So, I mean, again, to me, the friendliness question to me is almost entirely irrelevant. I don't care I don't want you to be unfriendly, but your sense of how friendly you are is significantly less important than how effective you are at actually building a relationship with someone. And building a relationship with them isn't just giving them a handshake and a high five and a hug when they walk in. That might be part of it, but there's no relationship at that point. You just said hello. Congratulations. You met the bare minimum of being polite. Now build a relationship. And if the question is, are we building relationships with people very often? The answer to that question is no, we are not. And so erase from your mind that we're friendly. It doesn't matter. If you are committed to building a relationship with people, you will be friendly as a byproduct of that. Focus on building.
You're not going to affect my perception of you as a guest when you say, now let's take a minute and greet those around us. And 5 people shake my hands and go, good morning. And then we turn around and we all sit down. Has no impact on my perception of how friendly you are. People just, what you just showed me was people can follow orders, not that you're friendly. So, but on the other hand, if I was sitting there, 3 minutes before church starts, and somebody else comes and they sit down next to me, maybe they already talked to 5 people on the way in, they sit down and they get settled, they put their Bible down, whatever, and they turn over and they're like, hey, I don't think I've ever met you. Hi, what's your name? And we have, even a 30-second or 1-minute conversation and they ask a couple of probing questions, like, oh, well, what brings you? Do you live here? Whatever. I would probably leave that day going, oh, that was kind of cool. That person took the time to just have a conversation with me.
Yeah.
So,
And, likewise, if someone shakes my hand when I walk in the door, and then I get some stock letter in the mail, like the one that just gets printed off on Monday morning and it's signed by the pastor, I don't necessarily think, oh, wow, that's a really friendly place. If I get an invitation to something, or if I get called by someone, doesn't have to be the pastor, by the way. The pastor does not have to be the one who does all this. You could have volunteers do this, but someone to say, hey, I'd love to take you to coffee and learn more about your family. Well, or something, anything like that, where there's an invitation to build a relationship. Now I have a different perception of your church. So the things that churches do that make them think that they are friendly, maybe, but it's generally irrelevant as to whether or not you're building relationships. So I guess we've explained this well enough as to why I think that this is a totally nutso thing for churches to say. It's like, what a weird flex to be like, hey, we shake hands with people when they walk in the door. Great. You're polite. Congratulations. But guests don't come back. Clearly it had nothing to do with whether or not you shook their hand when they walked in the door. Although I would contend, if you're not shaking hands with people when they walk in the door, you are being unfriendly, and that is a problem. But I digress.
All right. We're passionate about this one. Let's take a brief intermission while we settle down, and we'll get back to the next one. Number 2. We are a church where people come to heal. People come to heal. You've been hearing this one more than me, Scott, but we had a good conversation about this morning. And this is usually in response to how engaged are people in getting involved in the ministries of the church, volunteering, serving. And this is, probably a well-intentioned excuse for not pushing people to engage. I mean, to start living like a disciple. So tell us more about how you see this manifested.
This is another weird flex.
Yeah.
It's basically a way to brag that your church is a place where people can come and be anonymous. And I'm like, how is that a good thing? Like, why is that something that we would be really happy about? They'll say things like, well, we have a lot of people who come here. They come with a lot of church baggage, and they like that they can come here and just heal up. And I can understand the intention of that, but I don't think that the implication of that statement is a good one. So what you're saying is, I can come to your church, sit in the back row, no one ever talked to me. There's no accountability for me to engage. There's no accountability for me to use my giftedness and live out my calling and purpose. There's no accountability for me to build relationship with people who can love me and call me out on my junk. Because sometimes church hurt is the byproduct of, oh, someone called out my sin at my old church, and that made me feel bad, so I left. Sometimes, listen, anyone wants to sit down and have a cup of coffee with me and have a conversation about church hurt, I'd love to. I've been there. But even in my own experience, and I will tell you this, if we ever sit down and have a cup of coffee, even my own church hurt, at least partially, is a consequence of my own bad choices and mistakes. Not entirely, but there's a portion of it that I have to take accountability for and say, that's on me. That's my fault. So I guess what I'm saying is, it may be true that your church is a place where people come to, quote, heal up. What the lie is that isn't what healing is. Healing is not coming into a place and being anonymous. That's not what healing is. Healing is rightly engaging in discipleship, getting in good relationship with other believers, studying the Word of God in community, praying for one another. This is what the scripture says, right? Confess your sins one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. It doesn't say, go and sit in the back pew of some church in a dark room that you may be healed. That's not how that works. And so, sorry, I get real fired up about this because this creates two excuses. One, it's why we don't have a culture of accountability for people and an expectation that they're going to step up and serve. Oh, they're healing up. If you want them to heal, they need to engage. And two, we use this as an excuse for burning out our existing volunteers. You know, we have a lot of people, they're stepping up because other people are here healing. Well, you're creating an opportunity where those folks then are going to need some healing.
You're going to need to go get some healing at some other church.
Yeah, they're going to need to go to the church down the street that also heals, right? So I don't like it. It may be, and there's a grain of truth to it in the sense that maybe people do feel like they're wounded and they do feel like they can come to your place and blend into the background. I'm suggesting that that's not really healing.
Yeah. Good intentions, poorly executed. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not talking about someone taking, I just want to be clear. I'm not talking about someone taking a few weeks to lick their wounds. I've been there, seriously, like I've been there. But people will say things like, oh, we give them a year. Churches will say, we tell our folks, we don't want you serving until you've been here a year. Why? You've created a habit. You've created a habit for them to sit and soak.
Yeah.
It's just not good. I'm not talking about the crisis moment where someone needs a moment of respite, a month or 2 months to literally just get their head back on straight. But some people will be like, oh, I'm healing, and it's 10 years later or something. Like, okay, it's time to move on, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Our third one statement is that we're good at maturing disciples. And a lot of times this would maybe be a reactionary statement in churches that have not excelled in evangelism. And they kind of separate that out. Like, yeah, okay, maybe you're right. We haven't been out there, but boy, are we equipping people well here internally. And to which we say, no, you haven't, because mature disciples make disciples. So, yeah, your declining church that hasn't had a baptism, or did 3 baptisms last year for a few people. You can't stand there and say we're really building people up here well, because that just doesn't work. That doesn't compute in the Great Commission. So, or in Ephesians 4, or in any number of places in the New Testament.
No.
So yeah, we've got to break that down, and we have to separate. Well, I think we have to dig in. What really is making disciples all about? What is discipleship all about? Because if you really get into this, you cannot separate an evangelism element or the gospel message, sharing your faith, with also being a mature disciple. They're completely connected to one another, and you can't separate those.
No, you can't. And yeah, that to me is the proof is in the pudding, and that is like if your church isn't evangelizing, the outreach is failing, we're not reaching new people, that is the proof that your disciples are not actually mature. Very often, we've talked about this a lot. The Great Commission says to teach them to obey everything I have commanded you, not teach to know. And we swap that, and we think we're really good at instructing our people in Bible stuff. And so when we say we're good at maturing disciples, that's what we mean. We're good at teaching Bible stuff. And that's not the command. The command is to get them to obey. Teach them to obey. But connected to that, AJ, I'm going to keep pushing, which is that even the assumption that we're doing a good job teaching the Bible is often not true. You think you're good at teaching the Bible, but then I'll ask, like, when's the last time you actually sat in that class? Something like an elder or you as the pastor, you visited that class and you heard what was going on and what was being taught. You might be shocked and saddened to see the quality of some of the teaching that's happening.
Yeah.
It's very often not good. You wouldn't be proud of it. And so we assume that because people aren't just quitting the class, we've had this class for 30 years and these couples have been a part of that class for 30 years. We're really good at teaching them the Bible. It's like they could have been getting garbage for 30 years for all you know.
Yeah.
And that's a harsh word. I'm not trying to be cruel, but I've sat in a lot of Sunday school classes that were not good. And then when I ask the elders or the pastor, hey, have you sat in this class? And they'll go, no. And I'm like, well, maybe you should.
Yeah. It's really amazing the level of trust and lack of accountability that Sunday school teachers, and small group leaders, if they're doing Bible study stuff, that people have in the church. I mean, think about it. For every church, I don't know how many. Most churches are relatively small. So maybe across, all the churches in the United States, we have like 1.5 pastors, per church. But we might have 5 or 6 Sunday school teachers per church. There's way more Sunday school teachers out there in the world than there are pastors. And that's where most people are spending most of their time learning God's word, not from those who have had the most education and experience, but from lay leaders. And I totally believe that God's plan is for discipleship to happen with lay leaders in the church. I think that's right. But they also need to have accountability, and they need to have
some like all the more reason to make sure that you're training these folks up.
Yeah. And this is an area of the church that goes unchecked for decades at a time. Yep. But of course, those pastors, those 1.5 pastors per church, are like, how am I going to do that? And that's a discussion for another day, because there are ways to do that, to make sure that people are equipped well and have accountability in their teaching. So yeah, we kind of got a little bit off topic on this one, that just is simply a statement that we're good at maturing disciples, but we call that into question for sure.
I mean, to me, there's 2 components of that. Like, one component of why that's not true is if we were maturing disciples, we would be making more disciples. But also, even what we mean when we say that, which is we're good at teaching people the Bible, that often itself is also not true. So we're not even doing the thing that we think that we're doing very often. But I would contend that the proof of that is also that that there's no evangelism happening. If we were really teaching the Bible, we would see the necessity for that. And the fact that people don't feel that urgency is also proof that we're not teaching it the way that it's supposed to be taught.
Yeah. Teach them to obey. Obedience has to manifest itself with some kind of physical expression. There has to be some kind of action take place to have evidence of obedience. It doesn't, there might be, you could probably consider circumstances in which I'm being obedient to God, but it's simply a mindset. It's in my mind. It's in my thinking. Most of the time, obedience to what Christ commanded, teach them to obey everything I have commanded. Obedience to a command results in an action. It's physical and it's measurable. So
yeah, think about it. Sorry, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but when you tell your kids, "Hey, make your bed or clean your room," okay, I'm doing it, and it's like, are you doing it in your head, or are you going to actually do that? I'm going. You're okay. But your rear end is still on the couch.
You're still.
We
experience this.
Not going.
So
you're sitting.
Frequently.
Right. I have to think that God sometimes looks at us when we go. We're hearing. We're getting this dump from all this information. We go, yes, God, I'm going. And you're like, yeah, but you're still sitting. You're not going.
Every parent listening just said amen, because we've literally
we're all
the last
guilty
2
of this,
weeks,
right? Like my wife will say, "Hey, will you take out the trash?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do that." So Scott, you dummy, get up and do it. Take out the trash.
Yeah. Saying okay to something I'm telling you to do is not an act of obedience.
That's right. Yeah. It's just an acknowledgement that you heard it. It's actually more of a sign of your disobedience. Because at least you could say, "Oh, I didn't hear you say that," but you said okay. All right, I don't know.
It's turning into quite a cathartic episode here of complaints. All right, Number 4. All right, number 4. We can't grow. Our church is not going to be able to grow because of our demographics or our location or some other perceived
Fill in the
external
blank
force.
because of some external factor.
Yeah, yeah. We certainly, and it's people don't mean to do this. It's a human thing. We speak in absolutes way too often. The always, the never, the everybody, and it's rarely the case. But we do get stuck. We get stuck where we are, and it feels immovable. It feels like because many times churches have lost all momentum, and the laws of physics are at play. And it takes an external force and a greater amount of energy to get that stationary object into motion. That's what they're experiencing is zero energy. We don't have any movement forward. And then that comes out in excuses. It's because of where we are. It's because of who we have become. It's because who now lives nearest to our church. And these are not insurmountable objections. These all have a path forward with them, but it takes hard work. And so it's a lack of sitting down, considering what the issues really are, and making a plan to overcome them. I'm gonna speak us. That's our job.
I'm gonna say harshly. It's not very often. It's just a lack of faith. And I will give 2 really brief examples. I'll use us as an example. There's all kinds of things that at the Malphurs group we would like to do. And there are things, some of those things we have not yet done. And an excuse that we will tell ourselves is we don't have enough. We can't do XYZ because we don't have the funding.
Yeah.
We don't have enough donor support, or we don't have enough.
Sure.
So I'm just gonna use I'll point the finger back at us. We will use an external factor sometimes to say, well, this is why we aren't doing this. But every time that AJ and I have tuned out that story in our head and said, well, we're just going to make a plan and we're going to do this, and last year that included multiple overseas trips that at the beginning of 2022, we didn't have the funding for. But we said yes to those things anyway. And then we just trusted that the Lord was going to provide the funding for those things. And lo and behold, those trips happened and those churches were served. And, we didn't have to flap our arms to get across the ocean. Right. So I think that very often we judge our future success by our current circumstances. And so rather than just making faithful steps in the correct direction, trusting that if it's from the Lord, he's going to provide, we'll just make an excuse. And I think that's totally wrong. I'm just calling us out. There are things that I go, we should be doing X, Y, or Z. And we'll go, oh, we don't have the money. I'm like, oh, well, why don't we just start making steps in that direction and see if God provides the money? Because he will. And any church that has worked with me in the last several years will know that I will always point to Haggai chapter 2, where the people in Israel, in Jerusalem, not just felt, it didn't just feel like they were under-equipped. They were. They didn't have the skilled laborers. They didn't have the money. They didn't have the people. They didn't have the security. There are all these things that they didn't just feel like they didn't have them. They didn't have them. And God says to them, work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. And he says, the silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. And so no matter how you're feeling underprepared, you don't have the people, you don't have the resources, you don't have a great geography, you don't have a great location, you don't have a great whatever facility. It doesn't matter. You make faithful steps in the right direction and just see what God does. And all too often, we use our current circumstances to rationalize why we aren't making faithful steps in the right direction. Yeah. And so it is a lie, and you need to condemn it as a lie, and you need to just start making steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
Sorry, get off my soapbox now.
No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, man. Gosh, and I think about, some pastors that I know that are up against this type of wrong thinking by, quite a bit of their congregation. They they want to be faithful. They want to seek change. But they've got that internal resistance.
Yeah.
And that's such a hard place to be. So,
Well, I think what's important is to acknowledge too, AJ, that those difficulties are real,
yeah.
right? Like you really might not have the money. That's not like a figment of your imagination. Or you really might have bad demographics in your church. You really might be in a city that is on the decline. All of those things may be true, but you can't judge what God will do based on your circumstances. That's the point. There's all kinds of things we do at the Malphurs group that we just start doing them and we're like, I don't know if we're gonna have the money for that. And then we do when we need to.
Mm-hmm.
We've yet to have the year where we are flush with cash and we know in advance that we can do all the things we want to do. We're waiting for that year. But it's okay because God always provides. I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, our last one today, number 5, the statement is that we would lose half our church if we made that change. And it's really funny because half our church is like literally what we hear over and over and over. Like, well, that's interesting. It would come down to half. But that's just
your example for this, AJ. We were talking off here. This is good. I think it's a really good. I think it's good.
So my family is into like police shows, On Patrol Live. Love that. Right. On Patrol Live, Cops. If you watch these enough, you begin to see patterns develop whenever people are pulled over and the police interact with folks, and the drunk drivers or people that are suspected of driving drunk almost always will admit to having 2 beers. That's just the magic number. And the police frequently get a chuckle out of it. Like, okay, 2, huh? And they'll ask again later, how many did you have? After they've, blown up
some sobriety test
0.17 on the breathalyzer or something. Oh yeah, well maybe it was more than 2, but 2 beers. I've had 2 beers, and every church we would lose half our congregation. You bring up something bold, making a significant change, moving away from something that has just mired them down. We would lose half our congregation if we did that. And this brings me back, Scott. I hadn't really talked about this in a while, but I was meeting with a church in the last week or so, talking about our strategic envisioning process. We used to talk more about it, you can invite the whole congregation to witness the work that the strategic leadership team would do. I don't get that question as much anymore about that, but it is a fully transparent process. And so, put some chairs out for guests. You can announce, hey, we're going to be doing this work. And if you guys want to come witness this work that the team is going to be doing. And in previous years, pastors would be like, how many chairs should we put out? What size room should we do this? Because they think this is going to be such a significant thing for our church. There will be a lot of resistance. People would really want to come. And now anymore, if people are like, how many people should I expect? I'd be like, 1. No one's going to care. Either they don't care, or you have so much more trust from the people that it's not going to be a big deal. But pastors would worry about this. Like, this is such a significant thing that our church is undertaking. We could lose half our church. And I'm like, you know what? You probably won't. You probably won't come even close to that. We're talking about like good things. I mean, certainly there are things you could dream up that you could easily lose half your church for. But seeking the Lord,
your wife, you might lose half your church.
Yeah. Seeking God's will in biblical alignment with what he has said he desires for your church rarely would result in half the church leaving.
Or even, I think sometimes I told you that I was not thinking of this specific instance when we wrote this, but now that you were talking, an instance came to my mind where there was a decision. I worked with this church within the last, I'll be as vague as possible. A church that I once worked with at one time in the past needed to make a very difficult staffing decision. And they avoided making that staffing decision, which was to let someone go, for years. after it needed to happen. Years. All based on this lie that if we make this decision, half the people will leave. Ultimately, they did make this decision. And guess how many people left, AJ?
Half?
0. No one left. No one. They could not have been more off on their estimate. Now, they lost a lot of people before that happened. And the reason why they lost that was their inability to make decisions and change. So they lost more people from their inability to change than they lost from making a decision that was difficult. And that's what you have to tell. You have to understand. When you say, oh, I can't make this change, inaction is a choice, and it carries a cost. And it may be a slow bleed over the course of 2, 3, 5, 10 years, but it is costing you. It is costing you. And so the change you are afraid to make because you think the sticker shock on it is too high, you are very often overestimating the consequences of a change and underestimating the cost of maintaining the status quo. And that's what you need to remember.
Yeah, man. Well, this turned out to be quite an episode of rants from Scott and AJ, but I'm guessing that probably landed also with a few of you. If you want to read our show notes for today, go over to malphursgroup.com/175. And yeah, we've got, some thoughts that we've written down there. Or you can click over, if you've been listening on the audio podcast, then we've got this over on YouTube as well. Maybe run this by your leaders, maybe watch this episode with your team and say, do we do any of these 5 things? I hope you don't do all 5, but
hey, our part's not to beat anybody up. It's to tell tell yourself the truths instead of these lies.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that's really a lot of the work that we do is helping bring things to the surface that maybe have been pushed down or ignored, because it's only when we confront those and make a plan that real positive change can happen in the church. And that's what our heart is for your church, is to see you make positive changes and get in alignment with God's will and his vision for your church to make mature disciples. Grow the faith around the world. We're happy to be doing that with you side by side every week. And we'll be back again next week when we're going to have something else to talk about that may challenge your thinking and push you towards a greater future. Thanks for being with us.